6 HOA vehicles, a drone overhead, and a $100,000 fine taped to my front door from my own grandfather's cabin. I'd been gone less than 2 hours. The moment I turned onto that narrow mountain road, my stomach dropped. My driveway looked like a full-on raid. 2 black SUVs were parked like barricades. A pickup truck sat sideways across the dirt, blocking my path like I didn't belong there. Men in reflective vests were spread across my land, taking photos, pointing, talking into radios, moving like they had every right to be there. Then I heard it, that sharp electric buzz. A drone hovered above the tree line, circling slow, filming everything like I was some kind of suspect. And on my porch, standing perfectly still with her arms crossed, was Brenda Hartwell, the HOA president, dressed like she was walking into a courtroom, not trespassing on private property. She looked at me and smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Good afternoon," she said, calm as ice. "We're conducting a fire risk inspection." I didn't even answer. I just pointed at the paper slapped onto my door. $100,000. Due in 2 days. 2 days. My hands started shaking, not from cold, from pure disbelief. Because this land has been in my family since 1963, and I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't about safety. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Miles Blackwood, and that cabin up on the ridge isn't just where I go to get away from people. It's the only place on earth that still feels like my family is alive. 40 acres of wild land. Pines so tall they block the sky when you look straight up. A dirt road that twists like it's trying to keep strangers out. And at the very end of it, a cabin my grandfather, Earl Blackwood, built with his own hands. He bought the land back when this mountain was nothing but trees, mud, and quiet. No fancy stone entrance, no gates, no patrol trucks, just raw land and the kind of silence you can actually hear. My granddad wasn't a rich man. He was the kind of man who saved every dollar, fixed everything twice before buying something new, and never asked anybody for help unless it was life or death. When he wanted a cabin, he didn't hire contractors. He hauled lumber in his own truck. He cut timber. He hammered nails until his hands bled and still showed up the next day like it was nothing. And when that cabin finally stood, he treated it like a sacred thing. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. But because it was proof. Proof that hard work can turn an idea into something real. Some of my best memories are tied to that place. The smell of pine and old wood, the second you walk in. The sound of the screen door slapping shut behind you. The way my grandfather would sit on the porch at sunrise with black coffee, staring at the tree line like he was guarding the whole mountain. I learned how to split wood there. I learned how to fish at the creek. I learned how to be quiet. And when I got older, when life got loud and heavy, I kept going back to that cabin because it reminded me who I was before stress and bills and people started pulling me in every direction. When my grandfather passed, the land didn't come to me through drama or fighting or confusion. Everything was clean and clear. He'd handled it the way he handled everything, proper, calm, and prepared. The paperwork was solid. The deed transferred legally. Probate closed without issue. Taxes stayed current. No weird liens. No disputes. No loose ends. So in my mind, this was simple. This land was ours. It had always been ours, and nobody could touch it. Then Ridgecrest Estates showed up. At first, it was almost impressive. A gated community carved into the mountain like a luxury resort. A big stone entrance sign. Perfect rows of mailboxes. Fresh asphalt roads with bright yellow lines like somebody polished them every morning. It was all neighborhood pride and community standards and protecting property values. They had a homeowners association, of course. Ridgecrest loved that part. Their letters were always polite on the surface. They used words like friendly reminder and community well-being, and we appreciate your cooperation. They didn't sound like bullies. They sounded professional. And honestly, at first, I didn't care. Because I wasn't one of them. My cabin wasn't inside their gates. My land didn't touch their tidy sidewalks. I didn't attend their meetings, and I didn't sign anything. I'd drive through the main road because it was the easiest way up to my property, wave at whoever was outside, and keep going. They could run their little kingdom. That was their business. I thought we had an unspoken agreement. They stay on their side. I stay on mine. But then, Ridgecrest started expanding. More houses showed up like somebody hit fast forward. More roads cut into the trees. More fire safety signs. More HOA patrol vehicles creeping up and down the mountain like they were law enforcement. And that's when the first warning sign appeared. One afternoon, I came back to my truck and found a letter tucked under my windshield wiper. Not aggressive. Not dramatic. Just a clean white envelope with neat printed text. It said, "Reminder, all properties within the Ridgecrest Fire Compliance Zone must submit inspection documents." I stood there reading it twice, confused, because my first thought was, that's not me. I wasn't within their zone. I wasn't in their community. I didn't have to submit anything. So I tossed it in the passenger seat and forgot about it. A week later, I found another notice on the cabin door. This one said, "Notice, off-grid power systems must meet HOA fire standards." Now I started feeling that small itch at the back of my neck, because my solar system and battery setup wasn't some sketchy DIY mess. It was professionally installed, clean wiring, safe housing, proper ventilation. I'm not reckless. Still, I told myself it was just HOA paranoia. They were probably sending these out to everyone, covering themselves, trying to look responsible. So again, I ignored it. But then the third notice came, and this time it wasn't generic. It had my name printed across the top like a slap. Miles Blackwood. Failure to comply will result in immediate penalties. That was the moment my stomach tightened. Because you don't accidentally print someone's full name on a friendly reminder. That's not confusion. That's a target. I work in security systems for a living cameras, motion sensors, gates, access control, the whole thing. And when you do that job long enough, you get good at recognizing patterns. You start noticing how people apply pressure when they want something. It always starts small, something you can ignore. Something you can shrug off. Then it grows into a threat. Something time-sensitive. Then it turns into action because they want you to panic and comply before you have time to think. And Ridgecrest was moving through that pattern like a script, so I decided I wasn't going to argue with them emotionally. I wasn't going to guess. I was going to check facts. The next morning, I went straight to the county office and pulled every document tied to my property. Deed records, parcel maps, boundary lines, jurisdiction outlines, and there it was, clear as day. My land was not part of Ridgecrest, not by an inch. No overlap, no shared boundary confusion, no gray zone, nothing, which meant their letters weren't enforcement. They were intimidation, and that meant Brenda Hartwell's so-called inspection wasn't lawful authority at all. It was trespassing dressed up as professionalism. That night, I printed every document, stacked them neatly in a folder, and wrote 3 words across the front in thick black marker. RIDG, extortion. Because once someone hits you with a $100,000 fine and gives you 2 days to pay it, you're not dealing with safety anymore. You're dealing with control. The next morning I woke up hoping, just for a second, that maybe yesterday had been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe someone at Ridgecrest had gotten the map wrong. Maybe Brenda Hartwell had overstepped, and the board would rein her in once they realized what she'd done. But by the time the sun cleared the tree line, that hope was already dead. Because Ridgecrest didn't back off. They doubled down. It started with an email from Brenda. The subject line was cold and official, like I was a criminal case file and not a human being. No apology, no explanation. Not even a good morning, just a demand. Failure to comply will result in emergency action. Emergency action. I read those words 3 times, and I felt that tight, crawling sensation run up the back of my neck. The kind you get when you realize someone is about to do something reckless because they've convinced themselves they're untouchable. I didn't respond with emotion. I didn't threaten. I didn't insult her. I sent one calm email, one paragraph. I asked for proof that my land fell under Ridgecrest jurisdiction. I asked for written evidence of any real hazard. And I asked for the legal authority that allowed her to step onto my property with inspectors and drones like she was law enforcement. It was the kind of message a reasonable person would answer with facts. Brenda didn't answer with facts. She answered with force. Her reply came early the next morning, like she'd been waiting to hit send. She ignored every single question I asked and attached a brand new notice, stamped and formatted like she was printing her own laws. Emergency correction scheduled. Contractors will arrive within 48 hours. I stared at the screen and my jaw tightened. Contractors. In 48 hours. On my land. With no permission, no hearing, no court order, nothing. Just Brenda's signature and the arrogance of an HOA that had started confusing itself with the government. And that's when Ridgecrest began turning the community against me. Because the same day I got that email, my phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors I barely knew. People who had waved politely at me before. People who used to smile and mind their own business. Now their texts sounded anxious, almost accusing. Hey Miles, is it true your cabin is a fire hazard? Just checking, because Brenda said our insurance could be affected. They're saying you could put the whole community at risk. At risk. That's what they were calling me now. Like I was a walking threat. Like my grandfather's old cabin was a bomb sitting on a hillside. And that's how Brenda played it. Calm voice, polite smile, and fear underneath. She didn't need to scream at anyone. She didn't need to insult me in public. She just had to plant one idea in their heads. If Miles doesn't comply, we all suffer. Once you do that, the crowd starts pressuring you for free. That afternoon, I drove down through Ridgecrest to grab supplies, and the shift in the air was immediate. People stared longer than they used to. A woman walking her dog pulled the leash closer when she saw me, like I might be contagious. Even the gate attendant gave me a look that said, "We're watching you now." By evening, Ridgecrest took the intimidation even further. I heard vehicles on the road again, not one or two. A whole convoy. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw them coming up the driveway like a parade. 2 HOA SUVs in front, a utility truck behind them, and another pickup carrying equipment. Then more people climbed out, inspectors, clipboard men, someone holding a camera with a long lens like they were filming a documentary. And above the trees, that drone again, buzzing in slow circles like a vulture. They didn't just want to inspect, they wanted to stage a scene. They spread out across my land the same way they had the day before, except now it felt even more deliberate. One man took photos of my solar panels from every angle. Another walked around the cabin narrating into a recorder like he was building a case. Brenda stayed in the center of it all, hands folded, posture perfect, like she was standing on a stage. When she saw me, she gave me that same controlled smile, the kind of smile that isn't friendly at all. "It's ownership. We're documenting hazards," she said smoothly, as if she hadn't just threatened to send contractors onto my property. I kept my voice steady. "You don't have jurisdiction here," I said. "You're trespassing." Brenda didn't react the way normal people react when they're caught crossing a line. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She tilted her head slightly and said, "This isn't personal, Miles. It's safety." That word again, safety. And then she said the next line, calm as a knife sliding out of its sheath. I'd hate for the community to suffer because you refused to cooperate." I stared at her and realized something chilling. Brenda wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was trying to crush me. Because if she could make everyone believe I was the reason their families were at risk, then she didn't need legal authority. She had social pressure. And social pressure can be just as brutal as any court order. That night, I tried reasoning one last time. I sent another message asking for a formal meeting, asking for documentation, asking for a chance to resolve it like adults. Brenda responded with a single sentence. "Your deadline remains unchanged. 2 days. 2 days to pay $100,000 or face emergency action." I sat at my grandfather's old kitchen table, staring at the cracks in the wood where decades of family meals had been shared. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to panic, not because I thought I'd done something wrong, but because I could see the trap closing. They weren't giving me a way to solve this. They were giving me a way to surrender. Then, just as the night started to settle, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other end was smooth and quiet, too calm to be friendly. "Mr. Blackwood," the man said. "This is Daniel Cross." My blood went cold, because everyone in our county knew that name. Daniel Cross wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of developer who appeared right after land mysteriously changed hands. The kind of man who always seemed to profit from other people's bad luck. He chuckled softly like he was enjoying himself. "I heard there's been a misunderstanding with Ridgecrest." "How did you hear about that?" I asked. "This mountain has ears," he said, like it was a joke. And then he said the line that made everything snap into focus. "There's a way to end your stress immediately. I can make you a generous offer. Cash. Quick close. And I'll handle the HOA issue for you." My grip tightened around the phone. That was it. That was the truth, hiding behind all the paperwork and safety language and fake concern. This wasn't about fire risk. This wasn't about compliance. This was pressure. A squeeze. A forced sale. I kept my voice calm. "I'm not selling." Daniel didn't sound offended. He sounded amused. "Everyone sells eventually," he said softly. "They just sell at different prices." When the call ended, I stood in the cabin with the phone still in my hand, staring at my grandfather's old table like it might give me an answer. And that's when I realized the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. Because this wasn't just an HOA fight anymore. It was a land grab. And Brenda Hartwell wasn't the mastermind. She was the weapon Daniel Cross was using to take what my family had owned since 1963. I didn't march down into Ridgecrest swinging my arms and yelling at the first person I saw. Believe me, I wanted to. But I knew exactly how that would end. Brenda Hartwell would smile that calm little smile, tilt her head like she was the reasonable one, and tell everyone I was unstable, aggressive, a danger. And once you give an HOA that kind of narrative, they don't let it go. They weaponize it. So I did the only thing that actually scares people like Brenda. I got help. And I got proof. The first call I made was to a licensed fire inspector named Harvey Mills. He'd been in the county for decades. The kind of guy who didn't dramatize anything, didn't take sides, and didn't sign his name to reports unless he was absolutely sure. The second call I made was to a real estate attorney named Carla Unwin. Sharp, calm, and the type of person who can read one page of legal language and immediately tell you which part is a threat, which part is a bluff, and which part is flat out illegal. Harvey came out the very next morning. He didn't rush. He didn't let me talk him into a conclusion. He moved through my setup like a man who's seen every dangerous shortcut known to humanity and isn't impressed easily. He checked my solar panels, the shutoffs, the battery housing, the wiring, the ventilation clearances, the panel labels. He even walked the brush line, measuring distance the way professionals do when they don't want guesswork. When he finished, he stood in my driveway, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at me like he couldn't believe Ridgecrest was doing this. "Miles," he said, shaking his head, "this is cleaner than half the homes on the grid." Whoever's pushing this, it ain't about safety. Then he wrote it up. Full report, license number, timestamp photos, professional conclusion in plain English. A legal document that said my property was safe. And when I held that report in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt since the drone showed up over my trees. Control. Then Carla showed up later that afternoon. She read the HOA notice once, then again slower the second time. Her face didn't change much, but her silence lasted just a little too long. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "This isn't enforcement, this is extortion, dressed up in bylaws." And then she gave me one rule that became my religion from that moment on. "Do not speak to them alone," she said. "No porch conversations. No hallway chats. No quick talks by your truck. Everything is written. Everything is recorded. Everything goes through me." That night, I went into full defense mode. More cameras. High angles. Wide angles. Driveway coverage. Porch coverage. Porch coverage. Tree line coverage. I placed motion sensors near the boundary markers, so if anyone stepped onto my land again, I'd know the second it happened. I didn't do it because I wanted drama. I did it because Brenda had already proven she didn't care about boundaries. And if pressure didn't work, she'd try force. The next day, the official fine arrived. Not a warning this time. Not a friendly reminder. This one came in a thick envelope, certified delivery, stamped like it was law. When I opened it, I felt my throat tighten. $100,000. Due in 2 days. 2 days. Not within 30 days. Not payable by next month. 2 days, like they wanted to shock me into panic before I could even breathe. And right under it, in bold print, were the words that made me laugh, because at that point, it was almost insulting. Failure to pay will result in immediate enforcement action. They were treating this like a ransom note. Carla didn't laugh when she saw it. She just looked at me and said, "They're trying to trap you before a judge can stop them." And then, as if the universe was piling it on, my phone buzzed again. A Ridgecrest community email blast. Mandatory HOA meeting. Emergency agenda. I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't just coming for my money. They were coming for my reputation. Because if Brenda could turn the whole community against me, she wouldn't need a court order. She'd have an angry crowd pushing me toward surrender. So that Thursday night, I walked into the Ridgecrest clubhouse. And the second I stepped inside, I felt it. Every eye on me. The room was packed. Too packed. Too packed. Folding chairs, squeezed into corners. People standing along the walls. Neighbor whispers bouncing like mosquitoes. I wasn't Miles in that room. I was the problem. Brenda stood at the front behind a podium, perfectly composed, like she was about to give a presentation at a business conference. She had a screen set up behind her and a stack of printed documents on the table. She didn't look at me like a neighbor. She looked at me like an exhibit. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice smooth and steady. "This is a serious matter involving community safety." Then she clicked a remote, and my cabin appeared on the screen in giant, crisp detail. Drone footage, close-up photos, zoomed-in shots of my solar panels like they were contraband, angles taken to make my place look isolated and dangerous, like something out of a warning video. Gasps rippled through the room. Brenda didn't say my name at first. She said, "Unregulated structure." She said, "High wildfire exposure." She said, "Liability risk." And then she delivered the line she knew would set the room on fire. "If our insurance carrier determines Ridgecrest is at risk," she said calmly, "every single homeowner here could lose coverage. Every family, every mortgage." That word hit the room like a match. Insurance. People don't panic over bylaws. They panic over losing their homes. And suddenly, I could feel the mood shifting, fear turning into anger, and anger searching for a target. Me. A man near the middle raised his hand and said, So you're telling us one person could cost all of us everything? Brenda nodded slowly, like she was carrying the burden of truth. I'm telling you we have to act, she said, immediately. That's when I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't insult her. I didn't play into her setup. I held up the county map with my parcel clearly outlined. My land is not under Ridgecrest jurisdiction, I said, voice steady, and I have a licensed fire inspection report stating my property is safe. For a split second, the room hesitated. Because facts are dangerous in a room full of fear. Brenda's smile twitched. Then she recovered fast. That document is irrelevant, she snapped, just for a breath, just long enough for the mask to slip. And then she smoothed her tone again like nothing happened. We are voting tonight, she said. For immediate enforcement action? I stared at her. A vote. No hearing, no investigation, no due process. Just a crowd being pushed into a decision while they were scared. Hands started rising, not because people knew the truth, because they wanted their fear to go away. And Brenda's gavel came down hard, loud enough to snap the room into silence. Motion passes, she announced. Then she looked directly at me, eyes cold, voice soft enough that it felt personal. You will comply, she said quietly, or the community will act. And in that moment, standing in that room with strangers staring at me like I was a threat, I felt trapped. Not by law, by pressure, by fear, by a system designed to crush one person until they give up what someone else wants. At 4 a.m, I woke up to the sound of tires crunching gravel. Not one car, multiple. Heavy, slow. The kind of sound you don't hear on a mountain road unless someone is coming with a purpose. For half a second, I just lay there in the dark, listening. My heart wasn't racing yet, but I could feel it getting ready, like my body already knew what my brain was still trying to deny. Then I heard a door slam outside, and voices. I didn't jump up and run outside like they wanted me to. I didn't throw on jeans and start yelling. Instead, I reached for my phone, opened my security system app, and pulled up the live feeds. And there it was. A flatbed truck backed halfway into my driveway. 2 HOA SUVs parked like a blockade. 3 contractors in matching uniforms standing near the truck, glancing around like they weren't sure they should be there. And right behind them, parked perfectly straight like she owned the world, Brenda Hartwell's car. My stomach dropped, but my hands stayed steady. I hit record. I watched for a few seconds longer, long enough to capture every license plate, every face, every piece of equipment. Then I grabbed my keys, walked to the porch, and stepped into the cold air with my phone in my hand. The contractors turned toward me first. They looked like working men who thought they were here for something normal, a job, a repair, a cleanup. Not a forced takeover. Brenda didn't smile this time. No calm charm, no soft tone. No community safety performance. Her face was tight, impatient, like she was tired of pretending. Contractors are here, she said flatly. We're removing the hazard. I stared at her, making sure my voice stayed calm. This is private property, I said. You are trespassing. Leave immediately. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flicked toward Brenda, then back to me. You could tell he didn't like this. You could tell he'd been told a version of this story that made it sound legal. Brenda's head snapped toward him. You're authorized, she said sharp. Proceed. The contractor didn't move. For a split second, the whole scene stalled, like even the mountain was holding its breath. That's when Brenda pulled out her phone and raised it like a weapon. I'm calling law enforcement, she announced loudly, so everyone could hear. This homeowner is being aggressive. Aggressive. That was her favorite word. Her favorite trick. Because once she labeled you aggressive, she could paint herself as the victim, and everything after that became self-defense. I didn't take the bait. I didn't step closer. I didn't argue. I just kept recording, hands visible, voice steady. Call whoever you want, I said. But you're still trespassing. 10 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up the driveway. They got out slow, hands near their belts, looking around like they expected a fight. Brenda rushed toward them immediately, talking fast, pointing at my cabin, pointing at me like I was the danger. "This man is refusing emergency enforcement," she said. "He's threatening community safety." The deputies turned to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't act offended. I simply walked forward, opened the folder I'd prepared, and handed them the truth. Deed records, boundary maps, county jurisdiction lines, Harvey's fire inspection report, Brenda's emails, the fine notice. Everything. One deputy flipped through it, expression changing page by page. And then he looked at Brenda with a face that said, "Ma'am, what are you doing?" "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, measured but firm, "this is a civil matter. You cannot authorize contractors to alter someone else's private property without a court order." Brenda's jaw tightened. "This is emergency action," she snapped. "We voted." The deputy shook his head slowly. "That's not how it works," he said. "Not out here. Not on land you don't control." The contractors looked relieved, like someone had just pulled them out of a bad situation they didn't want to be part of. They started packing up equipment immediately. Brenda didn't argue with the deputies. She knew better than to push too hard when she was already standing in the wrong. Instead, she waited until the contractors were moving away, then stepped closer to me, close enough that only I could hear her. Her voice dropped into a whisper. "This isn't over," she said. Then she turned and walked back to her car like she'd just finished a casual errand. And the scary part was, I believed her. Because when someone is that confident while being that wrong, it means they think they have bigger power behind them. 3 days later, that power showed up in my mailbox. A certified letter. I opened it at the kitchen table, and my chest went tight the second I saw the word printed at the top. Leonatus. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to attach something to my land, like a parasite, something that would sit there, grow, and poison everything until I couldn't refinance, couldn't sell, couldn't breathe. $100,000, plus daily penalties. I called Carla immediately. The moment she read it, her voice sharpened like a blade. "This is fraud," she said. "They know they don't have jurisdiction. They're gambling that you'll panic, pay, or sell before anyone stops them." I swallowed hard. "Can they do that?" "They can file it," she said. "But we can destroy them for it." That was the first time since this started that I heard confidence in her voice. Not the calm confidence of a professional, but the kind that means someone just crossed a line so clearly that there's no gray area left. Carla moved fast. She filed for an injunction, an emergency court order to stop Ridgecrest from taking any further action against my parcel. And then she did something that made my stomach flip in a completely different way. She requested discovery, not just letters, not just public meeting notes. Discovery meant everything. Emails, text, meeting minutes, vendor agreements, contracts, anything that could reveal why an HOA would go this far over land they didn't even control. Because the truth was, normal people don't behave like this. Normal HOAs don't send contractors at 4 in the morning. Normal HOA presidents don't talk about emergency action like they're commanding an army. This wasn't normal. This was coordinated. And while Carla was filing paperwork, I got a phone call that felt like the final piece sliding into place. A private number. I answered, and a man's voice came through, smooth, calm, the kind of voice that never needs to raise volume because it already believes it's in charge. "Mr. Blackwood," he said. "This is Daniel Cross." That name hit me like ice water. Daniel Cross. Local millionaire. Developer. The kind of guy who shows up right before land disappears from families who've owned it forever. His tone was almost sympathetic, like we were old friends, and he hated to see me stressed. "I heard you're having trouble with Ridgecrest," he said. "That's unfortunate." I didn't respond right away. Daniel continued smoothly. I can solve this, he said. All of it. The fine, the HOA, the harassment. My grip tightened around the phone. And how exactly would you do that? I asked. He chuckled softly. I can make you a generous offer for your land, he said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Cash. Fast close. No delays. You walk away clean, and I handle the rest. For a second, I didn't speak, because in another situation, a generous offer might sound like a blessing. But right now, after everything Brenda had done, it sounded like the reason it was happening. Daniel's voice stayed smooth. You don't deserve this stress, he said. Let someone else take the burden. I looked out the cabin window at the trees my grandfather had walked beneath for decades, the porch where he used to sit with coffee, the ground that held our history. Daniel waited, patient, like he already knew how this story ended. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just listened. And in that silence, a seed planted itself deep in my gut, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't a random HOA power trip. This wasn't about compliance. This was about getting me off my land, and Daniel Cross wasn't calling because he cared about my stress. He was calling because he wanted what the stress was designed to take from me. The moment Carla filed for that injunction, something shifted. Up until then, Ridgecrest had been playing this like a polished performance. Letters, meetings, drone footage, safety concerns. Everything wrapped in professional language so it looked clean on paper. But once they realized I wasn't going to fold, the mask started slipping. Because when bullies realize fear isn't working, they stop pretending. And that's exactly what happened. It started with little things that were designed to make me feel watched. One morning I walked down to the mailbox and found it bent backward like someone had grabbed it and twisted it with both hands. The metal was warped, the post cracked, and the door hung crooked like a broken jaw. A few hours later, my internet went dead. At first I thought it was a storm issue, but when I traced the line, I found it sliced clean, no fraying, no accident. A straight cut, sharp, deliberate. I stood there staring at the severed cable, and my stomach dropped, because that was the moment it stopped feeling like an HOA dispute. That felt personal, and personal is where things get dangerous. That afternoon, I drove down into Ridgecrest to pick up supplies, and I saw Brenda Hartwell again. She was standing by the clubhouse entrance with two board members, arms folded, watching cars come and go like she was a queen monitoring her gates. When she spotted me, she didn't wave, she didn't smile. She stepped forward, like she'd been waiting for me. Miles, she called out, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Still refusing to cooperate, I stopped near my truck and kept my voice even. You have no jurisdiction, I said. You're trespassing, and your lien is fraudulent. That word, fraudulent, hit her like gasoline. Her eyes flashed, and for the first time she wasn't calm. You're endangering families, she snapped, voice sharp. You're a fire risk, and you know it. You just don't care. People nearby slowed down. Heads turned. That's what she wanted. An audience. I took a breath, trying to keep my temper buried. I have a licensed fire report, I said. Everything is safe. Your board knows it. Brenda stepped closer, her voice lowering into something cold. You think you're smarter than the community? She hissed. You think your little cabin is worth more than everyone's homes? That's when something in me finally cracked. Because she wasn't talking about safety, she was talking about control. And I could hear it in the way she said community, like it was a weapon she could swing at anyone she didn't like. I felt my face get hot, my jaw tighten. Get off my land, I said, louder now. Stop harassing me. Stop filing fake documents. You're not the law. Brenda's mouth tightened, and her voice rose so hard it echoed off the cars. You're threatening me right now, she shouted. This is exactly what I warned them about. I took a step back, holding my hands out the way Carla told me to. I'm not threatening you, I said. I'm telling you to stop. But Brenda was already pulling her phone out like she'd rehearsed this moment. "I'm calling 911, she said, loud and dramatic. "This man is unstable, aggressive, dangerous." She was building her story out loud in front of witnesses, stacking the words like bricks so everyone would remember her version instead of the truth. I stood there, breathing hard, fighting the urge to say things I couldn't take back. And then I heard it, sirens climbing the road, 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up fast, tires crunching gravel. Officers stepped out like they expected violence. Brenda didn't waste a second. She pointed at me like I was a threat. "He's been harassing the community," she said, voice shaky in that fake way people get when they're trying to sound scared. "He refuses to comply with emergency enforcement. He's hostile. He's dangerous." The officers looked at me, then at Brenda, then back at me. One of them stepped closer. "Sir," he said carefully, "we got a report that you made threats." "Is that true?" I swallowed hard and forced myself to calm down. "No," I said. I raised my voice, but I did not threaten her. "She's trespassing and trying to enforce an HOA fine on land she does not control." Brenda cut in immediately. "That's a lie," she snapped. "He's trying to manipulate you. He's been aggressive for weeks." I didn't argue with her. I didn't even look at her. I looked at the officer and said, "I have documentation, deed records, county maps, fire inspector report, per emails, the lien notice." The officer glanced at his partner, then nodded. "Let's see it." I walked to my truck, grabbed the folder I kept like it was a life jacket, and handed it over. For a few minutes, the only sound was paper flipping and Brenda's breathing. The officer's expression changed slowly as he read. His partner leaned in, eyes narrowing as he scanned the boundary map. Finally, the first officer looked up at Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "this property is not part of your HOA jurisdiction." Brenda's face tightened. "It's in the fire compliance zone," she argued quickly. "It's a hazard." The officer didn't budge. "That's not a legal boundary," he said. "You can't issue fines or file liens on land you don't control. This is a civil issue, and it looks like it may involve improper filings." Brenda opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first, because the truth had finally been spoken out loud by someone with a badge. Then the officer looked at me. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to give you a warning to keep things calm. Don't engage with her verbally. Let your attorney handle it. If she shows up again on your land, call us immediately." I nodded, still breathing hard, still trying to keep my anger from boiling over. Brenda stood there, furious, but she couldn't argue her way out of it now. Not with witnesses, not with paperwork, not with law enforcement telling her no to her face. She turned and walked away stiffly, shoulders tense, like she was holding herself together by force. And when the sheriff's vehicles finally drove off, leaving dust hanging in the air, I just stood there for a long moment, staring at the bend in my mailbox and the cut in my internet line. Because suddenly, the whole pattern made sense. The fine wasn't designed to be paid. It was designed to scare me. The meeting wasn't designed to solve anything. It was designed to isolate me. The contractors weren't there to fix a hazard. They were there to show me they could touch my land anytime they wanted. And then Daniel Cross called with a generous offer, right on schedule, like he was waiting at the end of the tunnel with cash in hand. That night, I sat at my grandfather's old table with the cabin quiet around me. No drone, no SUVs, no voices in the trees, just silence. And inside that silence, the truth settled in heavy and undeniable. This whole thing wasn't about fire safety. It wasn't about compliance. It wasn't even about Brenda's ego. This was about forcing me into a corner until the only way out was selling the land. They didn't want my apology. They didn't want my cooperation. They wanted my property. And now that I understood that, I knew something even more dangerous. They weren't going to stop until they got it. Or until I found a way to make them regret trying. After Brenda called 911 on me, something changed inside my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was clarity, because up until that moment, I'd been living in a storm, reacting, defending, trying to keep up with whatever new threat Ridgecrest threw at me next. Every day felt like survival. Every letter felt like a punch. But when the deputies handed Brenda back her own nonsense and drove away, I finally understood the truth. This wasn't chaos. This was a plan. And once you see the plan, the fear starts to drain out of you because you stop feeling trapped by surprise. You start feeling in control. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at my grandfather's table, staring at the grain in the wood, listening to the cabin creak the way it always had. The mountain was quiet again. No drones, no SUV headlights. No, Brenda's voice slicing through the air, just silence. And in that silence, I made a decision. I was done reacting. From now on, I was hunting. The next morning, I didn't go to Ridgecrest. I didn't call Brenda. I didn't send angry emails. I drove straight to the county records office and asked for everything tied to Ridgecrest Estates, HOA filings, boundary renewals, amendments, fire compliance notices, anything that showed how they defined their zone and how often they updated it. If Ridgecrest was truly worried about safety, the records would reflect that. But if this was about land, the records would reveal something else. And they did. The first inconsistency was small, but it grabbed my attention like a hook. Ridgecrest's fire compliance documents referenced boundaries that didn't match their official HOA jurisdiction map. The zone they kept threatening me with wasn't a legal boundary at all. It was vague language, stretched like rubber until it reached whatever property they wanted to pressure. One document said, adjacent parcels within visual range. Another said, properties within emergency access routes. Another said, any land that impacts community fire safety. None of it was defined. None of it had legal weight. It was just words designed to scare people who didn't know the difference. Then I pulled their meeting notices, not the ones they sent to homeowners. The internal versions filed in the county records, and that's where the exaggerations started showing. They claimed multiple violations observed on my parcel, yet the dates listed didn't match the days they'd been on my property. They claimed repeated refusal of access, even though I'd never been legally required to grant access in the first place. They were building a paper trail full of dramatic language and shaky details. Because paper trails create pressure. Pressure creates panic. Panic creates surrender. I printed everything, highlighted every inconsistency, and added it to my folder. Then I did something else. I brought Harvey Mills back, not because I didn't trust his first report, but because I wanted a second, even tighter one. One that was impossible to spin. Harvey returned with a thermal scanner, extra equipment, and that annoyed look on his face like he couldn't believe grown adults were still playing games. He inspected everything again, slower, more detailed. He checked the battery temperature, verified shutoff placements, recorded clearances, photographed brush distance. He even documented the fire extinguisher placement inside the cabin like he was building a courtroom exhibit. When he finished, he handed me the updated report and said, "If they call this dangerous, they're lying on purpose." That sentence mattered, because now I had proof that wasn't emotional. It was professional. And while I was collecting records and tightening evidence, I started watching Ridgecrest from a distance. Not like a stalker, like a man who knows something dirty is happening and is waiting for the mistake. I drove past the entrance during odd hours. I sat at the gas station down the road where the HOA board members always stopped for coffee. I listened quietly when people talked, and the more I listened, the more I learned. Ridgecrest homeowners weren't just scared, they were confused. Because behind closed doors, Brenda's story kept changing. Some people were told my cabin was a wiring hazard. Others were told it was a brush hazard. Some were told the county was about to intervene. Others were told the insurance company demanded action. Different version for different ears. That's not truth. That's manipulation. Then, on the third day of my quiet investigation, a neighbor approached me while I was refueling at the small station on the mountain road. He didn't give his name. He didn't even look me in the eye at first. He just leaned in slightly and spoke low, like he didn't want the mountain itself hearing him. "You didn't hear it from me," he said, "but Brenda's been going to Daniel Cross's house more than once." My fingers tightened around the gas pump. "How do you know?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "My cousin does landscaping up there. He saw her car." "Same one, parked behind the gates." Then he stepped back like he'd said too much and walked away. And there it was again, Daniel Cross. The man who called me with a solution. The man who wanted a quick close. The man who kept pretending he wasn't involved. I didn't go charging up to Daniel's mansion. I didn't confront Brenda. I didn't post anything online. That would have warned them. Instead, I waited, because when people think you're panicking, they get sloppy. And sure enough, they did. 2 evenings later, I drove the back route up the mountain and parked where I could see the entrance to Daniel Cross's property without being obvious. I didn't need binoculars. I didn't need fancy equipment. I just needed patience. At around 6 in the evening, headlights came through the trees. A sedan moved up the private driveway, and even from a distance, I recognized it immediately. Brenda Hartwell's car. She didn't park out front like a guest. She parked deeper in, near the side, like she didn't want to be seen. My mouth went dry. I didn't get out. I didn't trespass. I didn't do anything stupid. I just recorded from where I sat, making sure the timestamp was visible. Minutes later, another vehicle rolled in behind her, a Ridgecrest board member. Then another, a little meeting tucked away behind gates. Not at the clubhouse. Not on record. Not where homeowners could ask questions. Just Brenda and Daniel Cross, and a quiet gathering of the people who had been threatening to destroy my life. I sat there watching, and I felt something settle in my gut. Not rage. Not panic, certainty. Because now I had proof. The HOA wasn't acting alone. They were coordinated, connected. And while the community thought this was about fire safety, the real conversations were happening behind closed gates at a millionaire's house. That night, I laid everything out on my grandfather's table like I was building a case file. The reports, the maps, the inconsistencies, the screenshots, the video. Page after page of truth, and when I looked at it all together, the pattern was undeniable. Ridgecrest was creating fear. Brenda was directing it. And Daniel Cross was waiting at the end with cash, ready to scoop up land that had been in my family since 1963. But here's the thing about people who think they can buy everything. They always forget one detail. Paper trails don't just scare homeowners. Paper trails can also bury the people who created them. And by the time Brenda realized I wasn't just defending anymore, I had already built enough evidence to destroy her whole operation. The next time Daniel Cross called me, I didn't let it ring. I answered, and I didn't pretend I was still unsure. His voice came through smooth as ever, like he was offering a gift instead of circling my family land like a predator. "Miles," he said, "I'm trying to help you. This doesn't have to get ugly." I looked at the folder on my table: maps, reports, screenshots, and the video of Brenda pulling into his driveway like she belonged there. "I already told you," I said calmly. "I'm not selling." There was a pause, a small one. But it was enough. Because Daniel Cross didn't like being told no. "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said, voice still quiet, but the friendliness thinning out like paper under heat. "You can walk away with a very good check. You can be done with the HOA, done with the stress. Why fight it?" I stared out the cabin window at the pine trees swaying in the wind, at the ground my grandfather walked for decades. "Because it's not yours," I said, "and it never will be." Daniel's voice cooled completely. "All right," he said, Then handle it your way." The line clicked dead. And the second that call ended, I knew what was coming next. More pressure. More threats. A final shove to see if I'd break before court. But it was too late for them. Because Carla had everything now. Not just my story. Not just my word. Evidence. The kind that doesn't argue or beg. The kind that sits there, quiet, and destroys people one document at a time. Carla filed the full motion within days. An emergency injunction request, supported by exhibits that made Ridgecrest's whole Fire Safety Act look like a costume party. Deed records showing jurisdiction. County maps showing boundaries. Licensed fire inspector reports showing compliance. Videos showing trespassing. Photos showing contractors on my property. The lien notice that had no legal standing. And then, the piece that tied it all together like a rope around Brenda's strategy, the cross-proposal draft. A real document that talked about my land like it was already a future project. It listed compliance pressure enforcement like a business tactic. It budgeted legal acceleration. And it included that poison line at the bottom, board cooperation incentive, $50,000. When Carla told me the court accepted the filing, I didn't feel excited. I felt steady. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, the playing field wasn't Ridgecrest's clubhouse. It was a courtroom. And a courtroom doesn't care about fear. It cares about facts. The hearing was set fast. Ridgecrest tried to act confident, but you could feel the shift the second we walked in. Brenda arrived with an attorney in a suit so expensive it looked like he'd never sat in a plastic chair in his life. She walked in stiff-backed and composed, but her eyes kept scanning the room like she was searching for control that wasn't there anymore. Daniel Cross came too, sitting in the back row like he was just an observer, but he wasn't fooling anyone. He never looked at the judge, he looked at me. Like he still believed staring was a form of power. Carla spoke first. And watching her in that courtroom was like watching someone dismantle a machine with calm precision. She didn't rant. She didn't plead my case. She simply laid down truth in the right order. Deed and jurisdiction map. Mr. Blackwood is not governed by Ridgecrest HOA. Fire inspection report. His off-grid system is professionally installed and safe. Videos of the drone and the entourage. Ridgecrest entered private land without authorization. Video of the early morning contractor convoy. They attempted unauthorized alterations to private property. The lien notice. They filed a fraudulent lien for $100,000 on land they do not control. And then Carla lifted the cross-proposal draft and placed it into evidence like a final nail. The judge read it silently. His eyes moved slowly down the page. You could feel the air in the room tighten. The HOA attorney shifted in his seat. Brenda's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. Daniel Cross stopped, smiling. The judge looked up and stared at Brenda. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, voice calm but heavy, "are you aware of this document?" Brenda leaned forward, hands folded, tone sweet like she was back at her podium. "Your Honor," she said, "I've never seen that in my life." Carla didn't flinch. "We have the metadata," she said evenly. "It originated from an HOA board account. It references private meetings, and it outlines a plan to pressure Mr. Blackwood into selling his land." The judge turned his head and looked toward the back row. "Mr. Cross," he said, loud enough that every person in the room could hear, "stand up." Daniel rose slowly, still trying to look composed, still pretending charm was armor. "Are you involved in efforts to acquire Mr. Blackwood's land through HOA enforcement tactics?" the judge asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "No, Your Honor," he said. "I'm a developer. People bring me opportunities. I don't control what an HOA does." The judge didn't blink. "Then explain," he said, tapping the document, "why your name is listed under an incentive titled Board Cooperation. $50,000. Daniel's smile died so fast it was almost shocking. His lawyer moved to stand, but the judge raised a hand. "Sit down," the judge said sharply. And that's when Brenda made her mistake. She lost her composure. Not screaming. Brenda wasn't that kind of villain. She was controlled, polished, and quiet. But her tone sharpened enough to expose the truth underneath her performance. "It's not illegal to discuss expansion," she snapped. "And it's not illegal to protect the community from hazard structures." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Protect the community," he repeated slowly. "By filing liens on property you do not govern? By sending contractors at 4 in the morning? By abusing emergency language to bypass due process?" Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. Because there was no clean answer. Carla let the silence hang, then finished with the line that broke the last of Brenda's control. "This wasn't about safety," Carla said. "This was about forcing a sale." The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes hard now. And when he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was final. "I am granting the injunction immediately," he said. "Ridgecrest HOA is prohibited from any action against Mr. Blackwood's property, effective now." Brenda's shoulders tightened. The judge continued. "The lien filing is invalid and will be flagged," he said. "This court is referring these records for investigation, including fraudulent filings and potential conspiracy to interfere with property rights." Then he looked directly at Brenda, and the calm in his voice felt like a storm held behind glass. "You have treated this court like your clubhouse," he said. "You will learn the difference." The penalties came next. Ridgecrest was ordered to pay legal costs. Brenda was ordered to cease all contact, and the board's authority over anything beyond their jurisdiction was formally stripped, with warnings that any future violations would trigger harsher action. Brenda stood there stiff, blinking like she couldn't process the word no from a place that actually mattered. Outside the courthouse, she didn't come near me. No smug smile, no threats. She walked fast to her car, like she wanted to disappear into the pavement. Daniel Cross passed close enough that I could smell his cologne and his anger. "You made this public," he whispered through clenched teeth. I met his eyes and kept my voice calm. "That was your mistake," I said, "not mine." By the time I got back to my grandfather's cabin, the mountain felt quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that feels lonely, the kind that feels safe. And the next day, when Ridgecrest held an emergency meeting, it wasn't Brenda running the room anymore. It was the homeowners, packed shoulder to shoulder, demanding answers she couldn't hide from. "Why did you file a lien illegally? Why were you meeting at Daniel Cross's house? What is this $50,000 incentive? Who approved this plan?" Brenda tried to speak, but the room didn't let her shape the story anymore. Because once fear breaks, control breaks with it. And before that meeting ended, Brenda Hartwell resigned. Not proudly, not gracefully. She resigned because she had nowhere left to stand. And Daniel Cross? He vanished from Ridgecrest like smoke. Because men like that don't stay where the light is shining. They move on to darker places and hope the next family they pressure won't fight back with evidence. A week after everything finally settled, I stood on the porch of my grandfather's cabin and watched the sun sink behind the trees. Up here, sunsets don't feel like a normal ending to a normal day. They feel like the mountain itself is exhaling. The light turns soft, the air cools down, and the whole world gets quiet in a way you can't find anywhere else. The cabin was still standing. The roof line looked the same. The porch board still creaked under my boots. The old survey marker was still sitting in the dirt exactly where it had always been, like it was quietly reminding everyone, this line was never yours to cross. Nothing about the land had changed. But everything about the way it felt had. Before all of this, I'll be honest, I felt like I was defending something fragile. Like the right paperwork in the wrong hands could erase my family's history in a week. Like I could lose land my grandfather fought for, simply because someone louder and richer decided they wanted it. But now, it felt solid again. It felt like mine. Not because I won a shouting match. Not because I scared anybody. Not because I played dirty. I kept it because I stayed calm long enough to let facts do what facts always do. Stand up when lies run out of space. And the community learned something too. They watched an HOA president use fear like a weapon, and they watched a developer hide behind money and smiles, and they finally saw what was really happening right in front of them. Because pressure almost always hides a motive. And if there's one lesson I'll carry from this, it's simple. You don't beat people like that with rage. You beat them with records, evidence, and patience. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?